African Development Fund gets $8.9 billion commitment in 16th replenishment. Britain launches plan to ease development of clean energy projects. Plus, oil inches up on course for first weekly gain in 3 weeks. The program is Business Express, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Nneka, your guide. The value-added tax VAT has been a hot topic in Nigeria, especially with the proposed tax reform bills. One of the key issues surrounding VAT is the allocation formula. Now, the federal government tax reform bill proposes shifting VAT distribution to a derivation-based model, allocating revenue to states based on consumption rather than collection. It adjusts the revenue sharing formula to 10% for the federal government, 55% for states, and 35% for local government, while increasing the derivation share to 60%. The bill also seeks to eliminate state-level consumption taxes, compensating states with an extra 5% of VAT revenue. The reforms aim to simplify the tax system, resolve legal disputes, and include VAT in the Constitution. While some states, particularly in the North, fear revenue losses, the bill incorporates equalization measures to ensure no state is disadvantaged in the short term. Well, joining me to dissect this topic and more is Mr. Kaka, National Program Coordinator of Trade Network Initiative. You're welcome to Business Express.
Good afternoon.
Good. Let's start by breaking down the basics. What is value-added tax, VAT, and how is it calculated and applied to goods and services throughout the supply chain?
Okay, thank you very much again. I think let's start from the name itself, value-added tax. So if you're a manufacturer, you are expected to be an agent automatically for the Federal Inland Revenue. And so if any of the items that is listed to be VATed, which are not exempted or given zero written VAT, is actually used in production, the relevant applicable tax rate is applied to it. So if you're using a particular item that is to be taxed, that is VAT on it, it's not exempted, it's not rated zero, you have to take a 7.5% of that particular amount of money added to what you're doing. As it moves from one stage of production across the value chain to the next one, every other person is also trying to put his own. So you are a collector while you add your own to it. You are a collector while you add your own to it. Up to the point where you get to the final stage. Now, note that this money is an added cost to the cost of production. So everybody who puts is looking for the difference between what he has added and what the other person is actually adding on top of it. Up to the point where it gets to the final consumer of that particular thing. So when you buy the final finished product, you will find that there is a percentage written. Apart from the amount of the item, you said there is a value-added tax percent. This same thing for banking service. If you go do it, even if it's your account maintenance money, even if it's the SMS, you find plus value-added tax 7.5 or 5% as applicable to that particular thing. This applies only to items that are said to be on the list that are to be VATed. If it's an exclusive item, no. If it's an item with a zero rated tax, with a zero rated VAT, it is also exempted from it. And this is how the thing goes on until. And so once you collect the money, if the money goes, you are an agent to the Federal Inland Revenue. So at the end of the month, you are supposed to remit that particular value-added tax that has been added to what you have produced back to the Federal Inland Revenue Service. So it's not actually yours in the first instance.
Great. Now, the proposed tax reform bills suggest allocating 10% of VAT to the federal government, 55% to states, and 35% to local governments. How do you think this new allocation formula will impact the country's revenue distribution?
Okay, thank you. One thing should be noted, with the local government autonomy, people, if you check the statistics of the poorest of the poor in Nigeria, they actually live in rural community. And we feel if you can tackle the problem of poverty and hunger in the rural community, then you have halfway solved the problem of hunger and poverty in Nigeria. And so when you then allocate a chunk of the money to the local government, it decentralizes the focus on the federal government for everything everybody wants. If Nigeria is good, it's the federal government. If it's bad, it's the federal government. However, there are 3 tiers of government. Nobody's pointing at the state government. Nobody's pointing at the local government themselves. So doing it that particular way, say, look, you've taken your share of what is gotten from the federal allocation. You're also taking your share at the federal level. You're taking your share at the local government level. So it has decentralized that particular thing, that anything goes wrong at that particular other tiers of government, people should be pointing out at their governor, pointing at their local government representative and say, look, what have you done with the resources given to us? So I think it's a good idea to actually have it that way. People may disagree with the sharing formula, but I think it's a good starting point for us to actually make headway and see what can be done. Local government wouldn't be any more collecting than the state will actually be collecting. The federation itself is actually collecting other forms of revenue than the state. So it's also appropriate to have it that particular way and see how you can promote development at the subnational level.
Talking about the sharing formula, Northern Nigeria is concerned that the proposed VAT reforms will reduce their share of VAT revenue. With the current formula allocating 50% of VAT to states and 20% of that amount going to a state where the revenue is generated, how do you respond to their concerns?
Okay, the concerns for a lot of them is they feel somewhere in the north there is not a lot of manufacturing activities going on. Some of these big organizations that actually pay and help government generate this FIRS are somewhere in Lagos, in Port Harcourt, in Abuja, and the rest of it. Because once they collect, it is linked up to the head office of that particular organization as the one actually remitting that particular money. Apart from that, people feel if you do that with the derivative formula we have at the moment, you are shortchanging states where a lot of these items that are being VAT, where a lot of manufacturing activities are going on, will actually be shortchanged. That's exactly what they are looking at. But in all fairness, some feel, look, why don't you share it across all the states, irrespective of where the derivation is actually, where the money is actually coming from. And that way you might be promoting development, because there are other taxes that you're also collecting at those subnational level where some of these manufacturing outfits are actually located. But for now, that controversy has got a reason to want to pursue it, because they feel it's not an equitable way of actually going around things. But I think it's also saying, look, it's important for every state to begin to see how you can begin to build your IGR and take eyes away from what is coming up from the federation, for as long as you are able to do that at your subnational level, rather than waiting for the money that comes from the federation accounts to be your source of revenue and the source against which you actually administer your government at the subnational levels.
Now, let's use an example to illustrate how VAT remittance works. Imagine a scenario where a textile retailer in Lagos pays, let's say, 100,000 naira in VAT to a Kano-based manufacturer. How would this transaction be reflected in the VAT allocation, and what implications would it have for Kano State revenue?
Okay, for the person who collects it with the actually proposed formula, because it is coming from that Kano State, you will see that the larger chunk of it will go to them from where that particular allocation is actually coming from in the first place. The man who pays the 10%, that money that's why you see that when they give you a receipt for what you've done, the price of what is there is separated from the value-added tax, clearly indicating that this component is what is the VAT, this component is what we actually think we should charge you for what we have actually produced. And it is telling you that money does not belong to us, it actually belongs to an entity of government which we have to transfer. So if that is the final production stage and the retailer is actually paying for it, he's seeing on his receipt, this is the amount I have paid for VAT. What happens is every other kinds of transaction related to that manufacturer aggregates them, and at the end of the month remits it to the Federal Inland Revenue, from where they then begin to share it according to the sharing formula which they've also agreed at the end of the day to. That's the way the administration of that value-added tax actually goes. except it is one that is going through the value chain, then you begin to expand the explanation. But for a retailer who then pays 10,000 naira, that money does not belong to the manufacturer. He has only added it to the cost of what he's selling to you. It's at the end of the day, as a collector, sends it to the Federal Inland Revenue for sharing across the board on the sharing formula, which they've all agreed to.
Okay, projections suggest that the proposed tax reforms could increase Nigeria's VAT revenue by up to 500 billion naira annually. How do you think this increased revenue could be utilized to drive economic growth and development?
Okay, first thing is to understand that a lot of us want to believe that when government in particular believes the whole idea of actually imposing tax, which is a constitutional responsibility of citizens, is to generate revenue for them to be able to carry out. So it's like a source, a cheap source of development financing for government. But beyond generating revenue is that tax collection itself is also a means of actually shifting. Look, it's more like balancing the inequality in the society. So there is these people who are a bunch of rich guys who make a lot of money, but there are those who are extremely poor. And so the only way you have to do is to take from the rich ones and provide services that can benefit the poor. And so what I'm saying is that tax beyond generating development finance for government is actually meant to actually redistribute wealth across the economy itself. And if you look at it from that particular context, you then realize that when you collect this money, it is important that you devote it to actually social interventions, social goods and services that will benefit those who actually do not. And that is the way you begin to create a balance in the society. You take from those who have a lot and then see how it can benefit those who do not have enough in the society, while government at the same time is still generating revenue.
Do you think the proposed VAT changes will improve tax administration and compliance in Nigeria?
Well, it leaves to be desired. I think the committee that came out, the presidential committee, I must have thought it very well. Like you rightly said in one of your questions, there are controversies, there are arguments as to regards to what can happen to it. What we know at the end of the day is that, yes, it will actually generate more revenue for the government, but there are issues that are underlining some of these things. We hear there are arguments that, yes, basic item, food, whatever it is, every essential, pharmaceutical items, most things that are essential, basic foods, are exempted from value-added tax. You must understand when they say you are exempted. I told you across the value chain. So if this item is exempted from value-added tax, it means at the point it is being sold to you, the person who sells it to you does not collect VAT. Does not mean that across the value chain of production, VAT has not been added to it. It is only when you say something is zero VATed, that means across the whole value chain, nobody ever took VAT from it. So when you say something is exempted, it's only at the point of when it is sold to you that the VAT is not collected from it. All other VATs have been collected. It's important to make that clear, particular difference. And when you then say things are exempted, some are saying, look, who then define what is essentials are being are not, VAT is not placed on them. But then the question is, who determines what is actually being VATed? What is essential to a man might be different to a lady. So there are a lot of issues around what you exempt. For instance, right now, government will tell you, look, food is going to be cheap in the market because they feel basic food staple items does not have any VAT on them. But then if you look into the bill itself, they have said the generating companies of electricity themselves do not have to pay any VAT. The transmission company don't pay. But the discos, the people who actually transmit it as, people who actually give us the electricity distribution companies, all their services are being VATed, which means if I buy electricity today, I have to pay a VAT. If you say you made food cheap, if the means at which I have to cook the food, I am still being VATed, kerosene is VATed, electricity is VATed, then you have not made food cheap in the first instance. I don't know if I'm making any sense to you, because it's only the transmission company and the generating company that you've exempted. The cooking gas I need to cook it has not been exempted. So you've taken away VAT on one side and you've added it on another one. At the end of the day, I'm still back to where I am. So these are some of the issues people are discussing around it, and they feel it's no place.
Well, Mr. Chris Kaka, National Program Coordinator, Trade Network Initiative, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us on the program.
My pleasure being here.